I'm Sophia Chen, and I spent 12 years working night shifts as a forensic technician at Clearwater Regional Medical Examiner's Office in Millbrook, Oregon, or at least I did until I submitted my resignation 4 months ago. You can call me Sophie if you want, though most people in the forensic department just called me the graveyard specialist. During my time there, I've processed over 4,200 bodies in my career: murders, suicides, accidents, overdoses, natural deaths, and every conceivable way a human life can end. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about death, consciousness, and the very boundary between life and whatever comes after. It's the case that ultimately forced me to leave forensic work entirely and has haunted my dreams for the past 4 months. Clearwater Regional serves as the primary forensic facility for 3 counties in central Oregon, handling cases from the agricultural valleys around Millbrook to the mountainous regions near Mount Cascade. It's a state-of-the-art facility that processes between 800 and 1,000 deaths annually, ranging from routine natural deaths to complex homicide investigations that attract attention from federal agencies. I started working there in 2011, fresh out of my forensic science degree from Portland State University. What drew me to forensic work wasn't morbid curiosity, but rather a deep respect for the scientific process and a desire to help families find closure during the most difficult times of their lives. Working with the deceased requires a unique combination of clinical detachment and profound compassion. You're handling someone's loved one while gathering evidence that might solve crimes or answer medical questions. The night shift, which runs from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., is when most of our intake happens. Police departments, hospitals, and coroner's offices throughout the region transport bodies during overnight hours when traffic is lighter and the process can proceed with more privacy and dignity. During my 12 years on nights, I developed a reputation for thoroughness, attention to detail, and an almost intuitive ability to notice things that others might miss. I had processed cases involving everything from gang violence in Millbrook's rougher neighborhoods to hiking accidents in the Cascade Wilderness. I'd handled bodies recovered from car crashes, house fires, drownings in the Clearwater River, and drug overdoses that reflected the opioid crisis affecting rural Oregon. In 12 years, I thought I had seen every possible variation of human death. I was wrong. The shift started normally enough. I arrived at 9:45 p.m., as was my routine, to review the night's expected arrivals and prepare the facility for intake. My supervisor, Dr. Benjamin Rodriguez, briefed me on 3 expected cases: an elderly man who had died of apparent natural causes at Millbrook General Hospital, a motorcycle accident victim from Highway 97, and a priority case that was being transported from Hillcrest, a small farming community about 40 miles northeast of Millbrook. The Hillcrest case is interesting, Dr. Rodriguez told me as he gathered his things to leave. 31-year-old woman named Isabel Moreau, found deceased in her apartment by her landlord after neighbors reported a strange smell. But here's the thing, there was no smell when the police arrived, and the body shows no signs of decomposition despite supposedly being dead for at least 5 days. He handed me the preliminary report. Police initially suspected foul play, but the scene was undisturbed, doors locked from inside, no signs of struggle or trauma. Looks like possible suicide by medication, but the circumstances are unusual. I want you to be especially thorough with your documentation. I nodded, already mentally preparing for what sounded like a complex case that might require extra attention to detail. In forensic work, unusual circumstances often reveal themselves to be less mysterious upon closer examination, but they always warrant careful investigation. The first 2 cases of the night proceeded routinely. The elderly gentleman from the hospital showed clear signs of heart failure, and the motorcycle victim's injuries were consistent with the accident report. Both cases were straightforward, requiring standard documentation and preparation for autopsy the following day. At 2:47 a.m., The transport team from Hillcrest arrived with Isabel Moreau. The moment I saw Isabel, I knew this case was different. I've processed thousands of bodies over the years, and you develop an instinct about these things, a sense of what's normal and what requires closer attention. Isabel looked wrong in ways I couldn't immediately articulate. She was a petite woman, maybe 5'3" inches, and 115 pounds, with long auburn hair and delicate features. According to her driver's license, she was 31 years old and worked as a freelance graphic designer. The transport team wheeled her in on our standard gurney, covered by the regulation sheet, but something about her positioning seemed off. Most bodies, when transported, settle into the gurney in ways that reflect the natural effects of gravity and muscle relaxation after death. Isabel looked like she had been carefully arranged by someone who was trying to make her appear peaceful and dignified. Her arms were positioned perfectly at her sides, her head centered on the small pillow, her hair arranged neatly around her shoulders. But what struck me most immediately was her face. Isabel looked like she was sleeping peacefully, not like someone who had been dead for 5 days. Her skin had a pale but healthy tone, her lips still retained a hint of natural color, and her facial expression was serene, almost content. There were no signs of the bloating, discoloration, or tissue changes that occur even in the earliest stages of decomposition. I began to wonder if there had been an error in the timeline, or if something about the conditions in her apartment had remarkably preserved her body. Following standard protocol, I began my intake examination at 3:15 a.m. I photographed Isabel as she had been transported, documented her clothing and personal effects, and started the process of recording detailed observations about her physical condition. Isabel was wearing a simple white cotton dress that looked freshly laundered, with no stains, wrinkles, or signs of disturbance. Her feet were bare, toenails painted a soft pink color that showed no signs of chipping or growth that would indicate several days had passed since her last pedicure. She wore minimal jewelry, small silver earrings, a delicate chain necklace with a tiny star pendant, and a silver ring on her right hand that appeared to be handmade. Her personal effects, found in a small purse in her apartment, included a wallet with $47 in cash, credit cards, a library card for the Hillcrest Public Library, business cards for her graphic design work, and a smartphone with a completely drained battery. Nothing unusual or suspicious, but as I continued my examination, I noted several details that seemed inconsistent with someone who had been deceased for 5 days. Her fingernails were perfectly manicured, with clear polish that showed no signs of chipping or edge growth. Her cuticles looked recently cared for, and there was no dirt or debris under her nails that might accumulate over several days. Her hair, while arranged neatly, had a clean, recently washed appearance and smell. Bodies that have been deceased for several days typically develop a distinct odor, but Isabel smelled faintly of lavender, as if she had used scented shampoo within the past day or two. Most puzzling was her skin condition. While pale, it maintained an elasticity and texture that seemed inconsistent with several days of post-mortem changes. When I gently pressed on her arm to check for livor mortis, the pooling of blood that occurs after death, her skin blanched and returned to its previous color more quickly than I would expect. At 4:30 a.m., I began taking detailed measurements for my report. Core body temperature is crucial for estimating time of death, and given the uncertainty about Isabel's timeline, I wanted to be especially precise with these readings. Using our calibrated digital thermometer, I recorded Isabel's core body temperature at 91.7 degrees Fahrenheit. This reading was significantly higher than I would expect for someone who had been dead for 5 days. Bodies typically reach ambient room temperature within 18-24 hours after death, and Isabel should have been much closer to the 68 degrees Fahrenheit temperature of our facility. I took several additional readings at different locations, and consistently measured temperatures between 90 to 92 degrees Fahrenheit. These readings suggested either that Isabel had died much more recently than the timeline indicated, or that something unusual was affecting the normal cooling process. Equally puzzling was the state of rigor mortis. Rigor mortis typically begins 2–4 hours after death, peaks around 12 hours, and then gradually diminishes over the following 24–48 hours. After 5 days, a body should show no signs of rigor mortis at all. Isabel's body showed subtle signs of muscle tension that seemed inconsistent with any normal post-mortem timeline. Her muscles weren't rigid like classical rigor mortis, but they had a slight firmness that suggested some kind of ongoing physiological process. As I worked, I found myself being unusually careful with Isabel's positioning and handling. Something about her appearance made me unconsciously treat her with the same gentleness I would show to a living person, rather than the clinical efficiency appropriate for forensic processing. Around 5:15 a.m., as I was completing my external examination and preparing to move Isabel to cold storage, something happened that made me question my own sanity. I was standing beside the examination table, reviewing my notes and double-checking my documentation, when I thought I saw Isabel's chest rise and fall slightly. It was so subtle that I initially dismissed it as a trick of the lighting or my own fatigue from working the night shift. But then it happened again, a barely perceptible movement of her chest, as if she had taken a very shallow breath. I immediately checked for a pulse at her wrist and neck, using the techniques I had learned during my forensic training. I found nothing, no heartbeat, no pulse, no signs of circulation. Her skin remained cool to the touch, and she showed no other signs of life, yet I could swear I had seen her breathing. I spent the next 20 minutes observing Isabel more closely than I had ever observed any body in my 12 years of forensic work. I watched her chest, her face, her hands, looking for any sign of movement or life. Occasionally, I thought I detected the slightest rise and fall of her chest, but the movements were so subtle that I couldn't be certain they weren't caused by the building's ventilation system moving the sheet that covered her. I made detailed notes about these observations, knowing they would sound unusual in my report, but feeling compelled to document everything I was experiencing. At 6:30 a.m., 90 minutes before his normal arrival time, Dr. Rodriguez came into the facility. He explained that he had been thinking about Isabel's case during the night and wanted to review my findings before beginning the scheduled autopsy. "How did the intake go, Sophie?" he asked, hanging up his coat and reviewing the night's documentation. "Everything was thorough," I replied carefully. "Dr. Rodriguez, I documented some unusual findings regarding body temperature and timeline inconsistencies that I think you should review." He looked up from my notes with interest. "What kind of inconsistencies?" I explained the temperature anomalies, the unusual state of rigor mortis, and the remarkably preserved condition of Isabel's body, despite supposedly being dead for 5 days. I hesitated before mentioning the possible breathing movements, uncertain how to describe something I wasn't even sure I had actually witnessed. "That is unusual," Dr. Rodriguez agreed. "Sometimes environmental factors can affect decomposition rates, but the temperature readings you recorded are definitely outside normal ranges. Let's take a look at her together before we proceed with the autopsy." At exactly 7:08 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez and I approached the examination table where Isabel lay under our standard morgue sheet. The morning sun was beginning to filter through the high windows of our facility, casting long shadows across the sterile examination room. Dr. Rodriguez pulled back the sheet to begin his preliminary assessment, and what we saw defied every principle of forensic medicine and death investigation that either of us had learned during our careers. Isabel Moreau's eyes were open, and she was looking directly at us with calm, aware intelligence. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds, neither Dr. Rodriguez nor I moved or spoke. We stood frozen, staring at a woman who had been legally pronounced dead, transported to our facility as a deceased person, and processed through our intake system for over 4 hours. Isabel blinked slowly, a deliberate movement that left no doubt she was conscious and aware. She turned her head slightly to look around the examination room, taking in the medical equipment, the bright lights, and the two of us staring at her in shock. "Good morning," she said in a clear, calm voice that cut through the silence of the morgue. "I hope I haven't caused you any trouble, Doctor." Rodriguez found his voice first, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Isabel, can you hear me clearly? Do you know where you are?" Isabel sat up slowly on the examination table, moving with deliberate care as if she was stiff from lying still for a long time. The sheet fell away from her upper body, and she looked around the room, with curiosity, rather than fear or confusion. "I'm in a hospital, I think," she said thoughtfully, "or perhaps a medical facility of some kind. I remember feeling very tired, like I needed to sleep for a very long time, but I'm not sure exactly how I got here." What happened next challenged everything I thought I knew about death, consciousness, and the capabilities of modern medicine. Isabel Moreau had been legally pronounced dead by certified paramedics, examined by the county coroner, transported to our facility as a deceased person, and subjected to procedures that are only performed on bodies that show no signs of life. Yet here she was, sitting on our examination table, fully conscious, alert, and apparently unharmed by her experience. Dr. Rodriguez immediately called for emergency medical services while I tried to process what I was witnessing. When the paramedics arrived 20 minutes later, Isabel's vital signs were completely normal. Her blood pressure, heart rate, respiratory rate, and oxygen saturation were all within healthy ranges for a woman her age. Her neurological responses were perfect. She could follow simple commands, answer questions appropriately, and demonstrated normal cognitive function. There were no signs of brain damage, confusion, or disorientation that might be expected from someone who had experienced any kind of medical emergency. But according to every medical professional who had examined her over the past 5 days, Isabel Moreau had been dead. As the paramedics prepared to transport Isabel to Millbrook General Hospital for comprehensive evaluation, she began to describe her experience in a way that made both Dr. Rodriguez and me question everything we thought we understood about consciousness and death. "I remember going to sleep in my apartment," Isabel said, speaking slowly but clearly. "I had been feeling very tired for several days, like I was coming down with something. I remember lying down on my bed and thinking that I just wanted to rest completely, to sleep deeper than I had ever slept before." She paused, looking thoughtful. "The strange thing is, I remember everything that happened after that. I remember people coming into my apartment. I remember being moved and transported. I remember being brought here and being examined." She looked directly at me. "You were very gentle and respectful. I could sense your kindness even though I couldn't respond." This statement sent chills down my spine. If Isabel had been aware during the time she appeared dead, it meant she had experienced being discovered by her landlord, examined by paramedics and the coroner, transported in a body bag, and processed as a corpse in our facility, while being fully conscious, but unable to communicate. "Isabel," Dr. Rodriguez said carefully, "you're saying you were aware of what was happening around you, even though you appeared to be unresponsive." "Not exactly aware in the normal sense," she replied. "It was more like observing from a distance. I could sense what was happening, feel the emotions of the people around me, understand that they were trying to help or understand what had happened to me, but I couldn't move or speak, or give any sign that I was there." The paramedics transported Isabel to the hospital at 8:45 a.m., leaving Dr. Rodriguez and me to confront the impossible reality of what had just occurred. We immediately began calling colleagues, consulting medical literature, and trying to find any documented cases similar to what we had witnessed. How had a woman who showed no vital signs for 5 days suddenly returned to full consciousness? What kind of medical condition could mimic death so completely that it fooled experienced medical professionals, yet leave the person aware of their surroundings. Most disturbing to me was Isabel's claim that she had been conscious throughout her apparent death. If true, it meant she had experienced being treated as a corpse while being fully aware, but unable to communicate. The psychological trauma of such an experience seemed incomprehensible, but beyond the immediate questions about Isabel's condition, her case raised profound implications about our understanding of death itself. How many other people might have experienced similar states of consciousness while appearing to be deceased? How many families had we told their loved ones were gone when perhaps some level of awareness remained? Dr. Rodriguez immediately launched a comprehensive investigation into Isabel's case. He contacted specialists from across the Pacific Northwest: cardiologists, neurologists, psychiatrists, toxicologists, and researchers studying consciousness and near-death experiences. The hospital ran every conceivable test on Isabel: blood work, brain scans, cardiac monitoring, neurological assessments, and psychological evaluations. The preliminary results showed no evidence of drugs or toxins that could have caused a death-like state, no underlying medical conditions that could explain her condition, and no signs of physical or psychological trauma from her experience. But the questions surrounding Isabel's case went far beyond simple medical explanations. If she had truly been conscious during her apparent death, what did that reveal about the nature of consciousness itself? But did it mean for our understanding of the boundary between life and death? I found myself obsessively reviewing every case I had processed during my 12 years in forensic work. How many other people might have been aware during their time in our facility? How many subtle signs might I have missed or dismissed as post-mortem artifacts? In the days following Isabel's awakening, I found myself unable to perform my job with the same confidence and clinical detachment that had served me well for over a decade. Everybody I processed made me wonder: are they aware? Can they sense what's happening around them? Are they experiencing fear, confusion, or distress that I can't detect? The possibility that some level of consciousness might persist in ways our medical instruments cannot measure was profoundly disturbing to me, both as a forensic professional and as a human being. It challenged not only my understanding of death, but my entire approach to working with the deceased. I began treating everybody with even greater care and respect than before, speaking softly as I worked, explaining what I was doing as if the person could hear me. My colleagues noticed the change in my behavior, but I couldn't explain the growing sense that our understanding of death was fundamentally incomplete. Isabel was discharged from Millbrook General Hospital 3 days later with no medical explanation for what had happened to her. She remembered everything about her experience during those 5 days of apparent death: the discovery by her landlord, the examination by medical professionals, the transport to our facility, and the hours she spent in our morgue while appearing deceased. But what Isabel revealed to investigators about her experience during those missing days was even more extraordinary than her impossible recovery. Her detailed account of what she observed and felt during her apparent death would fundamentally challenge everything medical science believes about consciousness, awareness, and what happens when we die. What she told doctors about encountering other consciousness during her death-like state, and what happened when researchers tried to verify her claims using advanced medical technology, would reveal something even more disturbing about the nature of death and awareness. In part 2, I'll tell you exactly what Isabel experienced during her 5 days of apparent death, the groundbreaking medical research her case inspired, and in the discovery that ultimately forced me to leave forensic work forever. Because what we learned about Isabel Moreau didn't just challenge medical science, it opened a door to understanding consciousness and death that some believe should have remained closed. But Isabel's account went beyond simple observation. She claimed to have encountered other consciousnesses during her death-like state, people she described as waiting in the in-between space, some of whom she believed had been in similar states of apparent death. There were others there, she said softly, people who had been like me, caught between life and death, aware but unable to communicate. Some had been waiting for a very long time. They told me that this happens more often than medical science realizes, that consciousness doesn't always leave the body when life signs disappear. Dr. Rodriguez assembled a team of specialists to study Isabel's case in unprecedented detail. Neurologists from Oregon Health and Science University, consciousness researchers from Stanford, and experts in near-death experiences from universities across the country became involved in trying to understand what had happened to her. The medical tests revealed nothing that could explain Isabel's condition. Her brain scans showed normal activity, with no signs of damage or abnormality. Her blood work revealed no traces of drugs, toxins, or metabolic abnormalities that could have caused a death-like state. Cardiac monitoring showed a perfectly healthy heart with no irregularities that might have caused temporary cessation of detectable vital signs. But the research team decided to attempt something unprecedented. They wanted to monitor Isabel continuously using advanced medical equipment to see if they could detect the type of subtle life signs that might have been missed during her apparent death. Dr. Sarah Hamilton, a consciousness researcher from Stanford, proposed an experimental monitoring protocol using equipment sensitive enough to detect minimal brain activity, microscopic heart rhythms, and cellular-level metabolic processes that standard medical instruments might miss. If Isabel was truly conscious during her apparent death, Dr. Hamilton explained, there might have been biological processes occurring at levels below our normal detection thresholds. We want to see if we can identify what those processes might be. On November 3, 2023, Isabel voluntarily submitted to 3 days of intensive monitoring at Millbrook General Hospital's research facility. She was connected to the most advanced life monitoring equipment available: ultra-sensitive EEG machines, microscopic cardiac monitors, cellular metabolism detectors, and experimental consciousness measurement devices still in development. The goal was to establish baseline readings of Isabel's normal biological functions and then see if she could voluntarily enter a state similar to what she had experienced during her apparent death. What happened during that monitoring session challenged every assumption the research team had about the relationship between consciousness and detectable life signs. On the second day of monitoring, Isabel reported feeling the same profound tiredness she had experienced before her apparent death. "It's starting again," she told the research team. "I can feel myself wanting to separate from my body." Over the course of 6 hours, while remaining connected to all monitoring equipment, Isabel gradually entered a state that appeared identical to death. Her heart rate became undetectable by standard monitors, her breathing became so shallow that it didn't register on normal respiratory equipment, and her brain activity seemed to cease on conventional EEG machines. But the ultra-sensitive experimental equipment told a different story. Dr. Hamilton's advanced monitors detected microscopic cellular activity, extremely subtle brainwave patterns, and what appeared to be a completely unknown form of bioelectric activity occurring throughout Isabel's body. Her consciousness wasn't gone, it had shifted to operating at frequencies and intensities that conventional medical equipment couldn't detect. "We're seeing biological processes that shouldn't exist," Dr. Hamilton told us during the monitoring session. "Isabel appears to be in a state that's neither traditionally alive nor dead, but something entirely different that we don't have medical terminology to describe." For 4 hours, Isabel remained in this state, while the research team documented unprecedented biological readings. Her body appeared completely lifeless by all standard medical measures, yet the experimental equipment confirmed that complex consciousness-related processes were continuing at levels below normal detection thresholds. Most significantly, Isabel later described perfect awareness of everything that had occurred in the room during those 4 hours, including private conversations between researchers and detailed technical discussions about the equipment readings. Once again, she demonstrated consciousness and perception despite appearing medically dead. But what disturbed the research team most was Isabel's claim about the other consciousnesses she encountered during the monitoring session. They're still there, she told us after awakening. The others who are caught in this in-between state, and there are more of them than I realized before. Some have been waiting for decades, unable to communicate with the living world, experiencing awareness but trapped in bodies that appear dead. Dr. Hamilton was shaken by the implications of Isabel's experience. If what Isabel is describing is accurate, she said, it means our fundamental understanding of death is incomplete. It suggests that consciousness might persist in states we currently can't detect or measure, and that some people we consider deceased might actually be aware but unable to communicate. The research results from Isabel's case were published in several medical journals, but the broader medical community remained skeptical of the findings. The idea that consciousness could persist in undetectable forms challenged too many fundamental assumptions about death and medical practice. But for me, the implications were personal and devastating. I couldn't stop thinking about the thousands of bodies I had processed during my 12 years in forensic work. How many of those people might have been experiencing some level of awareness while I treated them as deceased? How many might have been conscious but trapped, unable to communicate their continued existence? The possibility that I had unknowingly caused distress to aware individuals by treating them as corpses was unbearable. Every memory of my forensic work became haunted by questions I couldn't answer and guilt I couldn't resolve. I began experiencing panic attacks during my shifts, unable to touch a body without wondering if they could feel my hands, if they were aware of being moved and examined, if they were frightened or confused by their inability to respond. Dr. Rodriguez was understanding about my situation. Sophie, he told me during our final conversation before my resignation, what we learned from Isabel's case doesn't diminish the respectful professional care you've provided to thousands of families over the years. But I understand why you can't continue with these questions haunting you. 6 months after her awakening, Isabel continues to live normally, but reports occasional episodes where she briefly enters the in-between state she experienced during her apparent death. These episodes last only minutes, but during them, she claims to maintain contact with the other consciousnesses she encountered. She has become an advocate for research into consciousness and death, working with Dr. Hamilton and other researchers to develop better methods for detecting minimal life signs and awareness in apparently deceased individuals. I believe I was sent back to bridge the gap between the living and the dead, Isabel told me during our last conversation, to help medical science understand that death isn't the binary state we think it is, and that consciousness exists in ways we're only beginning to discover. Isabel Moreau's case taught me that medicine, despite all its advances and sophisticated equipment, still encounters profound mysteries that challenge our most basic assumptions about life, death, and consciousness. It reminded me that the people we label as deceased might be experiencing forms of awareness that our current understanding cannot detect or measure. The case forced me to confront the humbling reality that consciousness might persist in places and ways that traditional medicine cannot reach. It suggested that the boundary between life and death might be far more complex and mysterious than we currently understand. But perhaps most importantly, Isabel's experience demonstrated that awareness and consciousness might continue in forms that transcend our physical understanding of death, offering the possibility that our loved ones might remain present and aware in ways we never imagined. I left forensic work in February 2024 and now work as a grief counselor, helping families process loss while sharing what I learned from Isabel's case. I tell them that their loved ones might be more present and aware than medical science can currently detect, and that the love and connection they feel might reflect a reality that exists beyond our current understanding. The case of Isabel Moreau will always remain the most profound and transformative experience of my professional life. It taught me that the mysteries of consciousness and death are far deeper than medical science has yet discovered, and that our understanding of what it means to be truly alive, or truly gone, is still evolving. If Isabel's experience teaches us anything, it's that we should approach death with humility, knowing that consciousness might persist in ways we cannot yet measure, and that the people we've lost might be more present than we ever dared to hope.